They even said despite pre-collapse exposure to fire, less than 2% of them had seen temperatures of 480 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very low relative to the temperatures needed to soften or melt steel.
These fires, it doesn't matter if it's diesel fuel, office materials, including paper, or jet fuel, they aren't hot enough to melt steel, these structural steel beams. To melt it requires approximately 1530 centigrade, about 2800 Fahrenheit. You can't heat the steel long enough with these fires to melt it. There are people who've looked at this and said, well, you see, what happened was that the floors got hot, they would sag and pull away from the core and start collapsing.
There were articles coming out in like Newsday from New York that said, well, these floor models didn't fail in the furnace. The temperatures that were seen by the steel samples were not high enough to soften or melt any kind of steel, even unfireproof steel. So those were the kind of questions that I was asking Frank Gale about, trying to get answers on. I really felt, honestly, that he was going to give me a response. I thought he was going to say, wow, you're right, you know, or well, this is why they're still talking about this. He never responded to me.
I mean, it's an unprecedented event. So I had no idea like what I was going to see when I got there. I thought that there would be like, you know, a tree fell over kind of thing, and you see the stump or something or whatever. I don't know what this is like. But when there was nothing there at all, basically it was all flat. It was just mind-boggling.
Now, the pancake theory requires intact concrete, a lot of mass, hitting the next floor, and then those two hit the next floor, you see? And so you would expect then from that theory, which is the official theory, as the floors pancake, you'd expect to see a whole stack of floors piled up on top of each other after the collapse is completed. Instead of a whole stack of floors, and then a spindle of the core column standing too, what you see is dust that's being produced. Now you can't have it both ways. In other words, if there's dust being produced, where's the mass that causes the collapse? And if there's a mass in the collapse, that every time one floor hits a stationary floor, or a set of floors hits a stationary floor, that'll slow the collapse down. The mass has to move out of the way to get the collapse to be rapid. Besant and Zhu looked at this, and they said, well, you have to have half the columns fail about the same time. There's 47 steel, huge, 3 feet at the base, steel columns going up the core, 47, they're interconnected. How do you get them to fail simultaneously so the core disappears? The plane did not cut all those core columns. The building stood for quite a while, so it's not like it was just ready to tip over or something, which is what you'd expect, by the way, if you cut some on the side. It looks like those core columns were pulled, cut. The support was gone from the core first, and that is the way demolitions typically proceed.
A 50-plus story section of the North Tower core remained standing after the collapse. This is what you would expect from the pancake theory. But watch what happens next. The core does not tip over, rather it collapses down upon itself, as if the entire structure had been cut. You can even see gray smoke rising from the end of the steel.
Now what can do that? What can move mass out of the way? Explosives. Explosives cut those steel support columns, and they can also then, up above as there's explosives, produce dust. I started looking at the molten metal. So I'm looking through the official reports. What do they say about the molten metal? They say nothing.